Hey guys, tonight we're headed to a place where gossip is thicker than stew and a whisper can turn into a haunting. Imagine you're sitting by a smoky hearth in a thatched roof cottage somewhere deep in the Polish countryside. It's late, almost too late. The only light comes from the dying fire and a candle stub clinging to life. Your host pours hot beetroot soup into a chipped bowl, offers you bread a little too hard to chew, and leans in close. "Did you hear what happened to Wojtek's daughter?" they ask. And just like that, your evening takes a sharp turn into the spectral. You've stepped into a world where stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings. And if you listen long enough, they start to sound like memories, not fiction. Welcome to a rural culture where ghost tales were grown like potatoes, passed down, shared freely, and always rooted in some half-remembered truth. This isn't a spooky campfire setting, this is real lived folklore. You're going to hear how entire communities whispered, exaggerated, embroidered, and accidentally created ghosts who never really left. And yes, you probably won't survive this bedtime story without a shiver. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by listening. The room is quiet except for the pop and hiss of the fire. No one speaks plainly in this village. Everything is hinted at. The gossip here is a ritual, and it always begins with something small. She was walking alone, or he didn't close the barn door right. Just those kernels. But the way they're said, with a glance, with a lowered voice, with someone else suddenly turning away, it plants the seed. Polish villages in the 17th and 18th centuries weren't just built with wood and straw, they were glued together by stories. And many of those stories centered around death. Not in a Grim Reaper sense, but in a "did you hear what happened when Janek didn't bury his mother properly" kind of way. The line between misfortune and ghostly vengeance was so thin you could slice it with a butter knife. In places where literacy was rare, word of mouth was the main currency of information. And people believed. If someone's cow stopped giving milk, it wasn't bad feed. It was the spirit of someone offended. If a newborn got sick, the cause might be some old grudge whispered into the wind. Death was never just death. It was the start of something unsettled, and that unease had to be talked about or risked growing into something worse. Here's a fun fact. Polish folk tradition recognized a ghost called the Zamora, a kind of spirit that crept into your room and sat on your chest, stealing your breath while you slept. Historians still argue whether this was just an old version of sleep paralysis or a genuinely held belief that your neighbor's grudge could literally suffocate you at night. In this whispery world, ghosts were born from suggestion. A peasant girl dies after wandering into the river. Tragic. But then someone says she was calling out her brother's name when they found her. Now that's odd. Soon, someone hears giggling near the river at twilight. Must be her. Within a month, no one will go near the river alone. The ghost didn't exist before the story. But now she's real enough that grown men avoid the riverbank like it owes them money. And the stories gain traction because they serve a purpose. Some of them warn, don't disobey your parents or you'll become like the pale boy seen lurking near the mill. Some soothe your baby didn't die alone. She became a guardian spirit. Some are pure theater. And honestly, when you don't have Netflix or social media, you make your own entertainment with a little superstition and a lot of imagination. You lean forward, elbows on your knees, and ask, "So what's the scariest story you've heard?" The room goes quiet. One woman starts twirling her spoon slowly in her soup. Another picks at her apron, eyes not meeting yours. And finally someone says, "There was once a boy named Marek who heard a voice calling him into the woods." And just like that, you're hooked. You wake to the sound of distant church bells, soft, eerie, echoing through the valley, like the slow toll of a giant heartbeat. They're not ringing for mass. No. In your sleepy haze, you remember what the old woman said the night before. Sometimes we ring the bells not for the living, but to chase away the dead. And now you can't help but wonder, what exactly are they trying to chase? The bells are part of a long tradition in Polish villages. They weren't just for celebrations or solemn rites. They were also weapons, sonic tools used to scare off spirits. You step outside and breathe in the crisp morning air. Everything looks normal. The goats bleat, the chickens peck, the dew glistens on the grass. But somehow the world feels thinner today, like you could poke a hole in it with a stick and peer into something else, something watching. You trudge down to the village square where everyone's pretending not to talk about last night's ringing, but you hear the murmurs anyway. It was for Christina's boy, someone says. He died without confession. You pretend not to listen, but you're hooked again. Dying without confession is no small thing here. It means the soul could be trapped, hovering unfinished, restless. And the bells are the village's desperate attempt to say, go on, go back. We're not listening anymore. Mainstream historians will tell you this was common across Catholic Europe, the idea that sound, especially sacred sound, could disrupt the grip of the supernatural. But in this village, it's not just ritual. It's a performance. The louder the bells, the more frightened the villagers seem to be. And the more frightened they are, the more likely the ghost becomes real. Today, Christina looks pale. She sweeps her doorstep aggressively as if trying to shoo away, not just dirt, but memories. You remember the boy always quiet, always walking alone. A neighbor swears they saw his shape in the fog this morning. Just the wind, someone offers half-heartedly, but no one repeats it. There's something uniquely Polish about this method of ghost-making. It's never about big spectacles. There are no bloody banshees or fire-spewing demons. Instead, it's a whisper, a glance, a toll of the bell. It's about absence being loud. And here's a strange little nugget for you. In some rural Polish communities, there was once a practice called Dziady, a Slavic commemoration, where the living invited the dead to feast with them, placing food on windowsills and near graves. The dead weren't feared, they were entertained. But if someone died badly by suicide, by murder, or without last rites, they weren't invited. And that made them dangerous. Forgotten, unwanted, they started knocking. Historians still debate whether these excluded souls were once real people with real tragic ends or symbolic placeholders for social guilt and fear. Either way, they haunt the gossip as much as the landscape. And every time the bell rings without a scheduled service, people start whispering, "Who didn't make it to the other side?" You walk toward the little wooden chapel at the edge of the village. The paint is peeling. The stone path is cracked. But there's a candle burning in the alcove, and you feel strangely comforted. Maybe it's the warmth, maybe it's the silence, but more likely it's the unspoken agreement. If we acknowledge the ghost, maybe it'll stay polite. You don't ask about the bells. That would make it too real. Instead, you help stack firewood beside the altar where the priest keeps a silver crucifix and a bottle of something stronger than wine. "Drink it before you sleep," he mutters, pressing it into your hand. Just in case. Just in case what he doesn't answer. He just closes the door behind you with a soft click that sounds too much like finality. And that night, when the wind picks up and a dog starts howling, you remember every chime of that bell. You hear it in your bones, and you wonder if it was ever meant for someone else, or if somehow they were always ringing it for you. It's still dark when you hear the knock. 3 soft raps against wood, deliberate, not wind, not accident. You sit up in your straw mattress blanket, clutched tight, heart thudding. No one knocks this early unless it's urgent, or unless it isn't a person knocking at all. But let's rewind a bit because the villagers say it started with a baby. There was a girl, Jadwiga, young and unmarried, who disappeared for weeks one winter. When she returned, she was thinner, quieter, but carried a tiny bundle. People noticed, of course, and whispered. But in public, no one said a word. The baby never cried. No baptism, no visit to the priest. Just silence. Until one night, both of them were gone again. When a bundle of rags, no too small for a bundle, washed up near the stream weeks later, the rumors ignited like straw. No funeral, no holy water, no grave. Just shame wrapped in linen and washed downstream. But you know what happens to babies who aren't buried properly in these parts. They come back. At least that's what the midwife claims. You meet her the next morning, bent over in her herb garden, clipping rosemary like it owes her money. She mutters to herself, stringing dried sprigs together. For the windows, she says, not looking up. Keeps them out. You don't ask what them means, you already know. Midwives in Polish villages had complicated roles. They brought life into the world, but they were also expected to deal with death when it came quietly in shame or before the priest could be called. Sometimes too quietly. Some say they whispered prayers the church didn't teach. Others say they simply carried burdens no one else dared to hold. There's a curious fringe belief, mostly oral, that midwives were secretly responsible for the first ghost gossips. They would know who died how, when, and whether the death followed the rules. And when it didn't, they might tell just the right woman over tea, who would tell another and another, until an entire village believed a ghost had risen. Power by whisper, no lightning bolts needed. Historians still argue whether these women were protectors, witches, or scapegoats. Probably a little of each depending on who you ask and how guilty they felt. Now back to the knock. You pull open the door. No one is there. Just the wind curling over the hills, pushing the mist through the branches like fingers dragging across lace. You step outside. Across the lane you spot Chadwiga's cottage. Abandoned. Window shutter swinging on one hinge like a broken eyelid. But in the frost just outside the door, 2 tiny footprints. Not baby footprints. Smaller. Bare. You don't speak of it. No one does. But that evening you hear someone whisper that a baby's cry was heard by the stream. That the water tastes different now, like metal. That Jadwiga's old mirror cracked right down the center as if something tried to claw through. The midwife shakes her head when you mention it. Too late now, she says. If it's been gossiped, it's been born. Ghosts here don't need cemeteries or centuries. They just need a village with a good memory and a few guilty hearts. You watch the candle flicker in your window that night and wonder, was that knock for you? You push the table against the door anyway. The next day you walk into wind hard and sharp, the kind that carries voices if you let your ears go quiet enough. And on this morning someone's voice is riding it. You can't make out words, not exactly. But there's a rhythm to it, rising and falling like breath. It's the wind, you tell yourself. Just the wind. But deep down, something in your gut clenches because you've heard the stories how the names of the dead sometimes drift through the hills, especially if they died confused or angry. Here's the thing, in Polish folk belief, spirits didn't always need a physical form. Sometimes they were just a presence, a pressure in the room, a cold spot, a name whispered on the air. If you ignored it, it faded. If you answered, well, then it knew you were listening. You reach the village mill, its wheel frozen in the early frost. A group of children huddles nearby, daring one another to say the name they think they heard that morning. Bogdan, one says with a theatrical shiver. He drowned. Now he calls out for someone to join him. Another child points to a spot near the river bend where the reeds are flattened perfectly circular, like someone or something has been lying there. It's not that anyone saw him, but once the story gets told, once enough people repeat it, it becomes its own kind of truth. Suddenly everyone remembers something, a dream, a chill, a shape in the fog. And before long, Bogdan isn't a boy who drowned. He's the boy who never left. This is how the ghosts grow teeth. Polish peasants had a name for these voices on the wind striga or topilek, depending on who you asked. The striga was a restless spirit, often of someone buried improperly or cursed by gossip alone. The topilek was specific, a water ghost, dragging the living down in search of company. Historians still puzzle over whether these figures stem from pagan mythology or church-influenced folklore. Some claim they're holdovers from Slavic river gods. Others believe they were inventions of grief, explanations for why some people just vanish in a world without headlines or search parties. You follow the stream for a while, boots crunching frost. The water is sluggish dark, whispering around the rocks. You hear your name. You stop. No one's there. Back in the village, someone says they saw a figure walking toward the woods at dawn. Barefoot, shirtless, skin like river clay. Another says they found fish bones laid in a perfect spiral near their doorstep. Bogdan, they say. He's looking for home. But here's the wild part, Bogdan never existed. You ask the elders and they shake their heads. No boy by that name has ever lived in this village. No grave, no birth, nothing. Which means the ghost came first. The gossip invented him. And you were one of the first to hear him call. You head home as the wind picks up again. It says nothing this time, but your name still echoes somewhere in your chest, like a pebble dropped into deep water. The smell of rye bread baking lures you toward the back of a cottage where smoke curls lazily from a stone chimney. The oven's warmth soothes your fingers numb from morning frost, but the conversation happening around the table just outside sends a shiver back into your spine. You sit on a low stool, pulling your coat tighter as the women laugh just a little too loudly, and glance toward the bakery wall like it's listening. They're talking about bread, yes, but not just bread. They speak of the oven, of how last winter the loaves cracked open to reveal streaks of red, like veins, one whispers. Another clutches her rosary and mutters, "That was the week Aniela fell into the river." Someone brings out tea spiced and cloudy, and the laughter softens. You sip and listen. These aren't just stories, they're spells, half prayers meant to protect and provoke. And the tale of Aniela isn't fading. If anything, it's hardening, proofing like dough in the heat of repeated retellings. In this village, bread isn't just food, it's a signal. If it doesn't rise right, it's a warning. If it bubbles oddly or splits open, people look for omens. And if the crust burns in the shape of a face, well, you can bet no one's eating that loaf. It goes straight into the fire or sometimes into the woods, too. Mainstream historians chalk this up to natural fermentation, old flour, poor ovens, unpredictable fire. But in oral folklore, that explanation doesn't stick. Villagers say ovens remember, especially if someone died in the home, especially if the body wasn't buried in hallowed ground, especially if no one mourned them properly. There's a fringe belief you overhear from one of the older women that ghosts cling to warm places, hiding in ovens, resting in chimney soot, soaking in the scent of hearth and ash. And if someone has unfinished business, their spirit might rise with the steam. That's why the bread cracked red, she says. She wanted to be fed. Everyone nods solemnly, even though Aniela's story has changed since last you heard it. First, she fell into the river. Now she was murdered. Tomorrow, someone will claim she never existed, but her ghost still lingers. And the oven listens to it all. You glance inside the hut and spot the old bread paddle resting on the wall. Carved into it are strange symbols, crosses, stars, a crescent moon. You ask about them, but no one answers. Instead, someone tosses another handful of flour onto the table and says, "You never poke a loaf while it's baking." That's how they get in. They isn't explained, but it doesn't need to be. Later that night, when your host brings you a slice of fresh bread with honey, you stare at it longer than you should. You check the crust for shapes. You sniff the steam for sulfur. It's probably fine. Probably. You eat it anyway. But not before whispering, "If this belongs to anyone else, I'm sorry," just in case. You wake to shouting, someone yelling near the well, boots thudding on frozen dirt. You grab your coat and stumble outside, half expecting a fire or a wolf attack. Instead, you see Kazimierz, the village fool, waving his arms wildly, eyes wide mouth, frothing slightly at the corners. "I saw it," he yells. By the pigsty white eyes, no face, it floated. Most of the villagers chuckle, or at least pretend to. Kazimierz is well known. He talks to trees. He wears shoes on the wrong feet. He once tried to marry a scarecrow. You almost laugh too until you hear the butcher mutter, "That's the second time someone said that this week." Now things are less funny. Polish villages had long memories, but even longer patience for eccentrics. Fools, madmen, and outcasts had their own strange social niche. People ignored them, pitied them, even fed them, but they also listened. Because sometimes these people saw things others missed or refused to see. And when the fool starts describing details, no one told him how the spirit hovered just above the frost, how its hands were backward, how its mouth never moved when it screamed. People stop moving. Stop laughing. Someone crosses themselves. Someone else mutters, "We should call the priest." Here's the twist, though. The priest doesn't show up. Instead, he sends his apprentice with a jar of holy water and instructions to sprinkle it near the pigsty. The apprentice's hand trembles as he throws it, then flees so fast he leaves the lid behind. No one wants to ask why. The story spreads like spilled grain. One girl says she saw something glowing behind her outhouse. Another boy refuses to sleep inside, swearing he hears breathing in his chimney. By dusk, a dozen stories are forming, and every single one matches what Kazimierz saw. That's how it works here. One seed, one mad voice. And suddenly, the whole village starts seeing ghosts in puddles and shadows. You try to stay grounded to remember what's real. But even you flinch when something brushes your coat sleeve and there's nothing there. There's a lovely little fringe belief you overhear from one of the beekeepers while he repairs his hive. Fools can see between worlds because they've got nothing blocking their view. No pride, no logic, no worry about being wrong. Their heads are so open, the dead just walk right in. Historians still argue whether the tales told by village fools were early mental health episodes misread by communities desperate for stories, or whether the fools functioned as a kind of accidental priesthood, mediating between the seen and unseen. Either way, Kazimierz now walks the village like a prophet, pointing out cold spots and nodding as if he knows secrets the rest of you don't. That night, you dream you're following him, through the fields, into the barn, toward the pigsty, and there in the moonlight is the thing he described. White eyes, no face, floating. You wake up gasping, tangled in your blanket, the air in your cottage heavy like wet wool. You tell yourself it was just a dream, just your mind chewing on gossip. Then you spot something outside your window, a single barefoot footprint in the snow, and your door's unlocked. By morning, the footprint is gone, swallowed by new snow, or maybe just a dream you convinced yourself was real. But the feeling lingers. That strange, crawling itch at the back of your neck like you forgot to do something important. Like something's watching. You're not the only one acting differently. Across the village, people whisper about the wolf. It started a week ago, they say. A widow named Zofia, recently bereaved, was seen walking the path toward the woods. She'd been crying, clutching her husband's coat, muttering something under her breath. But here's the part that makes everyone go quiet. She returned smiling, and she wasn't alone. Several villagers claimed to have seen a great gray wolf trailing her steps, head-lowered eyes glowing faintly. Not aggressive, not even skittish, just present, like a dog guarding its master. But no one else had seen wolves around for months, and no tracks were found the next morning. When you ask Zofia about it, she smiles too softly. He promised he'd watch over me, she says. And he is. Now this is where things turn interesting. You might think a wolf following a grieving widow would cause panic. Pitchforks, hounds, but not here. Instead, it sparks a theory the wolf is her husband, or at least his spirit returned to keep her safe. In Polish folklore, wolves often played double roles. They were feared predators, yes, but also symbols of loyalty, liminality, and transformation. A man who died violently or suddenly might return as a wolf, not cursed, but determined, especially if love tied him to the living. There's even a lesser-known folk tale, mostly passed from grandmother to granddaughter, about Wilkołak Dobry the Good Werewolf, a protective ghost. Historians still debate whether this was just a local variation of werewolf legends or something older rooted in pre-Christian animism. Either way, you suddenly find yourself avoiding eye contact with stray dogs, and the gossip grows. One farmer says his chickens are untouched because he leaves scraps for the spirit wolf. A child swears she saw the animal sleeping beneath Zofia's porch. Someone else finds tufts of fur at the cemetery gate, gray, soft, left in a perfect circle, like a nest. Of course, not everyone believes it. The miller mutters that Zofia's gone mad with grief, that she talks to shadows and forgets to eat. But even he lights a candle at dusk now, just in case. You walk past her house one evening and notice something peculiar, a crude carving in the doorframe, a paw print, 4 toes, no claw marks. Beside it, a small wooden charm tied with red thread, an old village custom for warding off Złe duchy or bad spirits. The charm's not there to keep the wolf out, it's to keep everything else away from him. That night, the village dogs howl in unison. You crack your window and listen. In the pause between barks, you think you hear something bigger, a low growl, not threatening, not hungry, just sad. You pull the blanket tighter, wondering if grief really can call back the dead, or if belief is enough to create a guardian out of thin air shaped like fur and teeth and devotion. Outside, the snow falls steadily, and somewhere in the woods something is still watching. You can smell the mead before you step inside, spiced and sticky, sloshing into wooden cups that haven't been washed since last harvest. The wake is already in full swing, and the cottage is hot with grief and celebration. A boy has died, only 16, and no one knows quite how. Heart stopped, they say. In his sleep, no illness, no injuries, just silence. The villagers have gathered as they always do to drink, sing, cry, and try to convince themselves that death is just a change of address. You stand in the corner, cup untouched, watching the way everyone avoids looking at the empty chair near the fire. That was his seat, and no one dares to fill it. A wake like this isn't just mourning, it's fuel. Fuel for memory, for rumor, for ghost stories that haven't yet learned their fiction. And when the wine flows, the stories follow. He was too young, someone whispers. Maybe he saw something. Another leans in. He used to sleepwalk, remember? Said he went to the forest and spoke with something. You sip, finally. Mead thick on your tongue, and you realize it tastes like honey and something else. Like regret. In Polish peasant tradition, wakes were often loud, defiant, and messy. They were part grief, part defense against the silence of death, against the fear that someone might come back. Stories were shared, yes, but also rituals. Coins over eyes, crosses carved into door frames, salt sprinkled under the bed, just in case the dead decided to rise. But the strangest thing happens at this wake. People begin to agree on what they saw. It starts with one woman swearing she saw a pale shape in the window the night before he died. Then a man chimes in. I was walking home, saw a shadow over the field. It moved wrong. Someone else claims a candle blew out on its own. Within an hour, 3 people have told the exact same story without realizing it. That's how it spreads. And here's a quirky little belief to sweeten your cup. Some villagers thought that during a wake, if the dead felt ignored or worse doubted, they might not rest. They might linger, or worse, they might pick someone to follow home. The boy's mother stands suddenly knocking over her drink. She's staring at the fireplace, mouth open. He was just there, she whispers. Sitting, everyone freezes. Then someone laughs. Nervously, someone else clears their throat. And just like that, the story is born. The boy's ghost is present, here, watching his own send-off. Historians still argue whether these sightings were alcohol-fueled hallucinations, subconscious grief projections, or a way for communities to process tragedy through shared imagination. But in this moment, you don't care about academic theories. You care that the fire just flared for no reason. You care that the room smells like mead smoke and something faintly metallic. You care that the empty chair by the fire, it's rocking slightly and no one touched it. You drink the rest of your mead in one go and leave before the story can catch your name. Because if enough people say you were there when the ghost appeared, then maybe you were. And that means it might follow you next. You walk quickly past the edge of the village where the last cottages thin out and the fence posts rot with lichen. The road turns to mud and beyond it lies the forest, tall, patient, and indifferent. You weren't planning on coming out here. No one ever plans to. But the children dared each other, and now you're supposed to make sure no one gets lost. They call it the knocking forest. No one remembers why, at least not officially. But unofficially, the stories pile high as cordwood. That something knocks once, twice, 3 times just after sunset. Not like an animal, not like wind. Like knuckles on bark. Deliberate, rhythmic, waiting for a reply. You step past the final tree line, and the shift is instant. The air turns still like breath held too long. The birds go silent. Even the children fall quiet, their bravado melting. One boy tries to laugh but chokes on it. Another girl points to a stump and says, "That's where they sit." It's always a they, isn't it? Here's the folklore twist. Many Polish villagers believed ghosts didn't always haunt houses or graveyards. Some preferred liminal places, thresholds, gates, bridges, and forests. Especially forests. Trees were once seen as living witnesses with roots deep enough to tap into the underworld and branches high enough to touch the divine. A place like this, prime real estate for the restless dead. You pause near an old birch, its bark peeling like cracked parchment. You place a hand against it. Cold, solid, but not quite still. You feel something faint like a heartbeat, or maybe just your own. Someone behind you knocks, 3 times. You spin around, but the kids are frozen wide-eyed. None of them moved. Historians still debate whether this knocking legend is a remnant of ancient Slavic tree worship or an echo of trauma villagers who vanished in the woods, their disappearances blamed on ghosts rather than wolves or weather. Either way, the forest holds its secrets, and every new whisper adds another ring to the story. Don't answer the knock, one child mutters as if quoting scripture. If you knock back, they know you're real. Suddenly, everyone's ready to go home. The kids race ahead and you follow, but not before glancing over your shoulder. The birch tree stands as before, unmoving. But a rock that wasn't there before now sits at its base, perfectly round, wet with dew, as if it's just been placed. You say nothing. You walk faster. And that night in your cottage, you hear it again, 3 knocks soft and even on your wooden shutters. You don't open them. You don't breathe. You wait until morning. You tell yourself it was a dream, the knocks, the forest, the cold stone on the window ledge. You tell yourself a lot of things these days. But then you hear your neighbor screaming, not in fear, in grief. You rush to her cottage. She's crumpled on the ground, hair wild, one hand clawing at the earth, the other clutching a piece of paper. A note, she says. But when you look, it's blank. Just a scrap of old parchment singed at the edges. She insists it was from her cousin, her dead cousin. Apparently he came to her in a dream last night. Said he had a warning, that something was coming. Something that doesn't knock politely. This isn't the first time someone's claimed to be visited in dreams around here. In fact, it's practically a local pastime. You've heard whispers for weeks, dreams of drowned women, of men with no eyes, of children calling from under the floorboards. In Polish folk belief, dreams weren't just the mind's playground, they were portals, soft places between sleep and death where the dead could visit, sometimes to warn, sometimes to beg, sometimes to accuse. One old farmer swears his brother appeared to him sobbing. Said the priest buried him in the wrong direction, feet pointing west instead of east. I wake up choking, the farmer mutters, like he's trying to crawl up my throat. You try not to let that image stick. Here's a quirky fringe belief you pick up from the local beekeeper. He hears everything, don't ask why. If you dream of the dead and don't tell anyone, within 3 days they'll come back again. Louder, hungrier, harder to ignore. That's why you now hear people muttering to chickens, to fences, to bread dough, just in case no humans are around to hear. Historians still argue whether these dream encounters reflect suppressed trauma, or if they were shared rituals, communal ways to cope with grief by treating sleep as sacred space. Either way, it means every nap could become a seance. You lie down that night exhausted. You close your eyes. You dream of a boy with his back turned. He doesn't move. You try to speak, but your mouth won't open. Then he turns his head, not all the way, just enough to show that his face is too long, too blank, and made of ash. You jolt awake, heart pounding, mouth dry. There on your windowsill is another piece of parchment, still blank, but this one's wet, as if someone cried into it. You stay up till sunrise listening to your own breath, and the silence outside. The butcher's yard smells like iron, not fresh meat, older than that. Deeper. You know that scent. It crawls behind your eyes and settles somewhere you can't quite scrub out. The village butcher Tomasz has always been a quiet man, broad-shouldered, barely speaks unless he's got a cleaver in hand. But this morning his face is pale, his eyes glassy. He waves you over without a word and points behind the smokehouse. There at the edge of the fence is a pile of bones, not wrapped, not buried, just stacked like firewood, clean and picked dry, yet covered in fresh flies. Most are animal, chicken, pig, goat, but not all. One is too long, too thin. Tomasz stares at you, eyes pleading. They weren't there yesterday. That's when the moaning starts. It's soft, low, wet, coming from inside the bone pile. You both freeze. A rat, a trick of the wind, or worse, someone playing games. You move closer, and the moan sharpens into something halfway between a sigh and a growl. You step back quickly. By noon, the story's already making rounds. The butcher's yard is haunted. Some say it's the ghost of a starving beggar Tomasz turned away last winter. Others say the bones rearranged themselves into the shape of a sleeping man. You don't go back to check. Polish villagers often saw butchers as sitting near the border of life and death, respected but wary. After all, they dealt in blood, and blood had power. Spill it carelessly, and you invited attention from things that listen for death. There's a fringe belief passed down in certain regions: if too many bones are left unblessed, they call for a soul to fill them. It doesn't matter if they're pig or pigeon or person. Enough bones gathered together become a magnet, a body-shaped whisper. Historians still debate whether these stories were cautionary tales meant to enforce burial customs, or if they reflect actual village rituals lost to time. But Tomasz now keeps a candle burning by the back door day and night. He hasn't touched the bone pile. You visit him again later. He won't speak, just gestures to the shed where a single animal skull now sits on a stool, its eye socket stuffed with salt, its mouth sewed shut with red thread. You don't ask. You leave quickly. That night you swear you hear a bone crack under your floorboards. Just once. A quiet snap in the dark. You pull your feet up into bed, and you don't move until morning. The well is older than the village. No one remembers who built it. The stones at its base are smooth from centuries of hands and bucket ropes. It has no roof, just a mossy rim and a long, creaking windlass. Most avoid it. Not because it's dangerous, but because it talks. At least that's what the children say. You draw water one cold afternoon, arms aching from turning the crank. The bucket rises slowly, water sloshing. You lean in to pull it free and hear giggling. Clear, sharp, a child's laugh echoing from inside the shaft. You drop the rope. It whips down into the dark with a sound too fast, too final. You don't lean in again. Later over dinner, you casually mention it, and your host stiffens. Don't talk to the well, she says. That's what it wants. You blink. It turns out there are stories, old ones. Once a girl named Milena fell into the well. Some say she was pushed. Others say she jumped. Her body was never found. They say the water stayed red for a week. No one drank from it, not even the livestock. Then the voices started. At first it was cries, then whispers, then laughter. Now people draw water in pairs. No one leans over, and if you hear your own name come back up the shaft, you drop the bucket and walk away. In Polish peasant superstition, wells were considered thresholds, gates to other places. Maybe not hell exactly, but somewhere sideways. A place where unfinished souls could wait, or echo, or reach. Here's a weird fringe tidbit. Some villages tossed old coins into their wells not for luck, but to bribe whatever lived down there to stay quiet. You've even heard of someone dropping a dead hen in once. They claimed the voices stopped, but only for a month. Historians still argue whether the haunted well motif was an imported trope or a uniquely local phenomenon shaped by isolation and oral storytelling. Either way, this well has earned its reputation. You go back the next day, this time with a friend, Tomasz the butcher. You lower the bucket slowly. It hits the water with a soft glup. Then nothing. No sound, no laugh. Tomasz leans over slightly. You hiss don't. Too late. He flinches. You grab his arm. What did you hear? He doesn't answer. You both walk away, and that night he nails boards over his windows. He leaves a candle burning in the outhouse. And you, despite yourself, dream of falling headfirst into a black tunnel full of giggles that don't come from any mouth you've ever seen. When you wake, your mouth tastes like iron, and your boots are wet. You hear the dogs before you see the place. They're barking, not excited, not warning, refusing. Their voices rise in sharp, uneven bursts, full of fear. You turn the corner by the barn, and there they are, 5 village dogs straining on their ropes, every tail low, every ear pinned back. None of them will cross the old barn's northeast corner. You watch as one pup tries to move closer. Trembling, it takes one step, then yelps and bolts backward, tangling its leash. The others whine in unison. Something's wrong with that corner. You approach slowly, just a few cracked boards half covered in mold. There's no smell, no blood, no sound, nothing. But even you don't want to stand there for long. Someone joins you, a teenage girl, face pale beneath her braid. It's where the wagon overturned last spring, she says. Crushed a man. We buried him proper. But she trails off, then simply shrugs. The dogs know. Polish villagers believed animals, especially dogs, could see what humans could not. If a dog refused to enter a house, the family might delay moving in. If it barked at empty air, they listened. And if a dog died suddenly, someone would start sleeping with a cross under their pillow. There's a saying the beekeeper told you yesterday: trust your animals. They don't gossip, they remember. And here's a strange local custom. Some families placed a black dog near the feet of the dying to absorb evil or ease the soul's passage. But if the dog howled instead of laying still, it meant the soul wasn't going quietly. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic ritual or genuine fear of spiritual residue. But in this barnyard, fear isn't theoretical. It's snarling and clawing at the dirt. Later that day, the farmer tries to drag one of the dogs toward the barn with a treat. The dog bites him. That night, the farmer has a fever. By morning, he's speaking in tongues, eyes darting toward that same corner, even from bed. The priest comes finally, sprinkles water, mumbles Latin, lights incense. The dogs don't stop barking. You pass by on your way home. The corner seems darker somehow. Not shadowed, just deeper. You throw a glance over your shoulder just to be sure. And there, just for a moment, you see something small and fast duck inside the wall. You blink. It's gone, but the dogs saw it too. It starts as a joke. At the tavern, after a second round of beet liquor, someone scoffs at the story's ghosts' pleas. You're all just bored. The speaker is a newcomer, a barrel-chested man from the next valley over. He's bold, loud, and by the third round mocking the village straight to its face. Knocking forests, haunted ovens, whispering wells, he says, raising his cup. I've seen scarier goats. No one laughs. But they don't argue either. Instead, the room settles into a strange hush. Not offended, just waiting. You've seen this before. When someone tempts the quiet things, when someone calls them out by name, you watch as the tavern owner sets down a fresh drink slower than usual. A few people mutter blessings under their breath. You notice someone slip a pinch of salt into their boot. The man downs his drink, laughs, and stumbles into the night. 3 days later, he doesn't come down for breakfast. By noon, someone checks his cottage. By sundown, the gossip is wildfire. They found him curled in a corner, shivering eyes wide open, throat raw from screaming. Alive, but barely. He won't speak, won't eat, won't blink. They carry him to the chapel on a litter made from oat sacks. The priest won't perform a full exorcism, says it's too soon. Instead, he places a bundle of wormwood on the man's chest and whispers to it. You're not even sure who he's addressing. Here's where it gets weird. There's a belief not often written down that mocking the dead even indirectly is a kind of summoning. In some regions it was said that the spirits might not hurt you immediately. Instead, they'd wait. Visit first in dreams, then in smells, then in sounds, until your mind opened like a cracked egg and they slipped in. The man's cabin smells of rotting hay and river mud. His boots are filled with water, though there's no rain. You poke around the place later out of morbid curiosity. Inside, the mirrors are all broken, not shattered, peeled. Like the reflective layer has bubbled up and curled inward, revealing only a dull black behind. You don't linger. Historians still argue if these punishments were cautionary tales meant to enforce belief systems. But in this case, there are no sermons, no moralizing. Just silence, and the slow realization that the villagers are right not to laugh. The tavern stays quiet for days. No one sits in the newcomer's old chair. You do your best not to look into reflective surfaces that night. You draw the curtains. Cover the small mirror with your scarf, just in case. You think you're safe, until you hear the first sound, like someone dragging a nail across the outside wall of your cottage. You freeze, then it comes again, slowly, deliberate. You whisper a blessing you barely remember. You press your back to the door, and the scratching stops. For now. There's a hush over the village crossroads. The chickens are quiet. The leaves don't rustle. Even the wind feels like it's holding its breath. You stand there, boots sinking into the soft mud eyes fixed on the dirt path where something odd has appeared, a set of barefoot prints. They're small, feminine, and travel in a perfect line from the chapel to the split where the roads part in 4 directions. The prints stop there abruptly. No return trail, just vanishing. Someone behind you murmurs it's her again. You turn. An older man you vaguely know is standing with his cap in his hands. The bride, he says, always comes before the rain. They call her the Wandering Bride. No one remembers her name. Or maybe too many stories claimed her, and now she's no one and everyone. She appears at dusk, barefoot, wearing a white gown stained with something that isn't quite mud. Some say she's looking for her groom. Others say she's trying to cross the road but can't choose which direction leads to peace. One child swears she helped him find his lost dog. Another says the ghost touched her arm and her fever vanished the next day. It's hard to know whether she's benevolent or tragic or simply stuck. In Polish folk tradition, crossroads were deeply symbolic. They were liminal spaces not just where roads met, but where the veil thinned. You'd bury suicides or criminals at crossroads so their spirits wouldn't find their way back to town. You'd never sleep there. You'd never dig. And you'd definitely never walk barefoot across one at night. Fringe belief. Some elders used to leave offerings at the crossroads. A slice of bread, a white ribbon, sometimes a needle. Things brides might need for the next life or the one after that. Historians still debate whether these rituals were born of Christian superstition or older pagan rites. But what's certain is this. Whenever someone sees the bride, something changes. The weather, the livestock, a pregnancy discovered, a sickness gone. You linger too long. The sun is almost down. And then you see her. Across the road, not glowing, not floating, just there. A pale figure half shrouded in fog, standing perfectly still. Her head tilts slowly as if she's listening. You don't move, neither does she. Then she lifts one hand not to wave, but to beckon. The air thickens. You blink. She's gone. You walk home faster than you should, and for the rest of the evening, you keep your shoes on. Even in bed, you spend the next morning in the fields hoeing soil that's already been turned too many times. The frost hasn't let go, not fully, but the sun is trying. It's a hopeful sort of day until someone says, thank you. Not to you, to something else. Old Janusz bent, and quiet pats the earth as he finishes his row of potatoes. Thank you for the rain, he murmurs. Thank you for staying this year. You ask who he's talking to. He doesn't answer. But the woman working next to him does. The dead, she says, shrugging. We thank them for the good harvest. The ones under the fields. The ones with no stones. She says it so casually you wonder if she's joking. But she's not. No one is. You've stumbled into a piece of folklore people don't talk about often. But it's there just beneath the surface like bones. In this village, the land doesn't just belong to the living. It's shared, leased, haunted. And in some unspoken agreement, the dead help keep things growing as long as they're respected. A few paces down, you see a tiny marker, a bit of cloth tied to a stick fluttering in the breeze. It's not a grave exactly, more of a tribute. For Simek, someone says. He died young, no burial, but he loved barley. So we plant him barley. You feel something tighten in your chest. In rural Polish tradition, there's a long history of integrating spirits into agricultural life. Some believed that unburied souls, those who died in war, famine, or scandal, clung to the soil and needed to be appeased. Not exorcised, not feared. Included. One fringe practice even involved leaving bits of bread or a swig of vodka at the edge of the field after the harvest, just in case the dead were still working too. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, poetic gratitude, or a survival tactic dressed in spirituality. But you've never seen people hoe a field so gently, like they're massaging someone awake. Later that afternoon, you pass a woman scattering seeds in a perfect circle. For the child, she says, the one they never named. She'll help the beets grow. You nod, unsure what else to do. And when the rain begins soft and sudden, you see everyone pause. Not to take cover, to whisper thanks. Because in this village, if the crops thrive, it means the ghosts are content. If the carrots come up twisted, someone's angry. And if the wheat is barren, well, then you start digging. Carefully, you're fixing a broken hinge on your window when you hear the knock at the cobbler's door. Not a visitor, just a sound. Sharp, rhythmic. A little too late in the evening for business. But the old shoemaker opens the door anyway, and lets the ghost in. Or so the story goes. You weren't there. But the tale spreads quickly. By morning, everyone knows the cobbler had a midnight customer. Said the man wore a cloak too heavy for spring, a hood too low to show his face. Didn't speak, just pointed at his boots. Worn leather, ancient laces, soles eaten thin like parchment. The cobbler, being polite, invited him in, repaired the shoes, took payment in coins older than the village itself, copper so green it looked like moss. When he looked up, the man was gone. Left no tracks, no scent, just a pair of new boots still warm from the touch. The villagers whisper now that the shoemaker serves the dead, that his tools work in both worlds, and that if your feet start itching for no reason, you may be wearing shoes sewn for someone else, someone who wants them back. There's an eerie precedent for this. In some Polish folk traditions, tradesmen, especially cobblers, tailors, and blacksmiths, were believed to have indirect access to the spirit world. After all, they shaped what we wear, what we carry, what we bury with. Ghosts, it was said, might return for a well-mended coat or a final pair of shoes. You visit the cobbler yourself. He won't deny it. He just chuckles, eyes distant. Business is business, he says, living or dead. Then he offers to shine your boots free of charge. You politely decline. Here's a strange, lesser-known belief. Some villagers claimed you could trap a spirit by giving it bad shoes, one sole higher than the other. Ghosts, it seems, dislike limping. And if they fell while walking between worlds, they'd be stuck. Harmless. Lost. Historians still debate whether this was metaphor or actual superstition practiced in rural areas. But in this village, shoes are checked often, especially ones left outside overnight. Later that week, someone finds a pair of sandals nailed to a tree at the edge of the forest. No one touches them. The cobbler won't say why. That night, you hear soft footsteps in your attic. Slow, careful, dragging one heel slightly behind. You lie still and think about boots. You're sitting on a bench outside the chapel, chewing a hunk of cheese that tastes more like regret than milk when old Babcia Waleria joins you. She doesn't say much, never does. Just stares at the sky like she's waiting for it to blink. After a while, she leans in and says, "You know that ghost, the one by the woods?" You nod carefully. She nods back. "I made her up." You pause mid-chew. "I was angry," she continues, "at my sister-in-law. Said she stole my apron. So I said she'd be haunted. I described a girl with red ribbons and no mouth and how she watches from the trees. I knew the kids were listening." She shrugs. By nightfall, someone swore they saw her. You ask if she regrets it? "No," she says, pulling her shawl tighter. She keeps them from wandering off, and suddenly it clicks. This village doesn't just react to ghosts, it manufactures them. With purpose, with care. Ghosts are tools, warnings, stories woven with just enough detail to root themselves into soil memory and midnight fog. You walk the village differently now. Each crooked window, each half-told tale suddenly feels intentional, like a collective project, like everyone agreed to believe just enough, and over time these not-quite lies became truths. There's a quiet power in it. Folklorists call this narrative haunting a community, breathing life into an idea until it behaves like it's real. A whispered fiction becomes shared memory, and that memory becomes behavior. Fear shapes routine. Routine becomes tradition. Tradition hardens into belief. And belief, that's where ghosts live. Where? You ask the beekeeper, of course, about it. He nods slowly. We don't need the ghosts to be real, he says. We just need people to act like they are. And act they do. They close shutters on certain nights. They avoid the well at dawn. They never speak the names of the long dead aloud, not because they expect a response, but because expectation itself keeps the ghosts present. Here's a quirky fringe example. In some households, people leave the last dumpling on the plate for whoever's watching. Not in fear, in respect, in acknowledgement, as if to say, we see you, now please let us sleep. Historians still argue whether these rituals served a psychological need reinforcing social norms or whether communities truly thought the dead walked among them. But when the story is told enough times, the question becomes irrelevant. Because even you sitting there chewing your cheese, listening to Valeria chuckle about her fake ghosts, still feel like something's watching from the tree line. You don't look. You just nod and leave the last dumpling on your plate. You didn't know the hunter well. Few did. He lived in a crooked cottage just past the marsh, came to town only when meat or bullets ran low, and kept to himself the rest of the time. But when he didn't show up for a week, then two people started whispering. By the third week, the whispers turned to stories. They said he went into the woods after a stag and never returned. That his hound came back alone, limping and silent with a single bloody antler caught in its collar. That someone found his coat hanging from a branch, buttoned and dry, even though it had rained for 2 days straight. They never found a body. That's when the ghost sightings began. A child lost near the thicket claimed a tall figure in a green coat, guided him back to the path. The boy said the man had no face, just a blur like smoke over glass. A woman gathering mushrooms swore a man's voice whispered, "Don't step there," just before she nearly stumbled into a pit. And last week the widow Maya, half blind and nearly deaf, walked straight into town from her farm with a smile and said, "The hunter lit my lantern. I thought he'd gone missing." People aren't scared. They're relieved. They say the hunter is still doing what he did best, watching the woods, protecting the weak, leading the lost home. Only now he does it without a heartbeat. It's not an uncommon tale in Polish folklore, the benevolent ghost, the protective spirit. While most hauntings are warnings or punishments, a few stories, especially in small, forest-bound villages, speak of the Dobry Duch, the good ghost, a soul who never left because it didn't need to, because it still had work to do. Fringe belief. Some villagers would leave offerings at the base of trees near where the ghost was seen. Jerky, apples, a bit of honey or cured fat, not as tribute but as thanks. For the guide, they'd say. For the one who walks beside. Historians still argue whether this reflects older animist traditions or if it's just a rural way of mythologizing grief, turning loss into legend, turning disappearance into protection. You visit the woods yourself one day just beyond the path. You don't see anything. But at one point, you step wrong and feel your ankle twist hard. You catch yourself before falling. Right beside you, a branch sticks out from the mud, placed perfectly between two stones. Like a handle. You use it to steady yourself. When you look up, the path behind you has changed. You swear it was curving right. Now it's left. You make it home, eventually. And that night you dream of antlers swaying in the wind, of a green coat brushing through fog, and of someone whistling a hunting tune just beyond the trees. You wouldn't have noticed the lights if you hadn't looked down. They shimmer just beyond the marsh, where the land sags underfoot and smells faintly of sulfur and wet leaves. Not lanterns, not fireflies, something else. Pale and cold like frost with a pulse. They flicker in a slow rhythm, rising a few inches off the ground, then vanishing, then reappearing 10 feet to the left. You're not the only one who's seen them. 2 boys saw them last week while chasing frogs. One girl said they danced around her feet and whispered a name she didn't know. And an older woman swears they follow her home, never touching, never speaking, just hovering behind until she closes the door and turns the key twice. They call them światełka, little lights. Sometimes will-o'-the-wisps, sometimes something else. In old Polish folklore, these ghostly lights were believed to be the souls of the unbaptized, or of children who died unnamed, or of women buried in borrowed clothing. The stories shift like fog, but they always involve those who were forgotten, or denied something they needed to cross over. You crouch low beside a willow and watch. The lights flicker again. One is close now, hovering inches from the water. And in the silence you hear something faint and far off, singing a lullaby. The words are slurred soft, almost too gentle to catch. You strain to hear and your stomach flips when you realize it's a song your grandmother used to sing. One she hadn't heard since childhood. Behind you the children are huddled in a tight circle. One of them says the lights tried to take her. Not violently, just invited her. Promised warmth. Promised her mother's arms. Fringe practice. Some villagers used to scatter dried rosemary and salt around the marsh edge. Not to ward off ghosts, but to keep the living from following them. Because that was the danger, not being haunted, but being tempted. Historians still debate the origins of Światełka. Some trace it to ancient funerary rites involving floating lanterns. Others say it's a way of explaining natural marsh gas swamp fog or phosphorescent fungi. But none of those leave lullabies in the back of your throat. Later that evening, someone hangs a bundle of dried herbs on your doorknob. No note, just string and sage and a single red thread. You light a candle. You listen to the night. And when you finally sleep, you dream of walking into warm mist, hand outstretched, eyes wide. And just before you touch the light, something pulls you back. You wake up breathless, grateful, and just a little sad. You hear her before you see her old Agata, hunched over like a question mark, muttering to herself in the rye field. She's plucking weeds with one hand and waving the other in the air, fingers drawing invisible shapes. She's always been like this. People say she knows things, that she predicted the frost last spring, that she talks to the crows and they talk back, that she once cursed a man by spitting into his soup and muttering a name under her breath. You walk past carefully, but she stops and turns toward you, sharp, sudden, like she heard your thoughts. Don't say the name out loud, she hisses. They're listening. You don't ask who they are, you already know. In every village there's at least one, the wise woman, the crone, the one with a belt full of nettles and a pouch of wormwood. She knows who's pregnant before they do. She knows who won't live to see next winter. And more than that, she knows which names are dangerous to say when the wind is wrong. There's a long-standing belief in Polish folklore that names carry power, especially the names of the dead. To speak them casually is to wake them. To say them with spite is to invite them. So people get creative, the tall one, they say, or her who drowned, or simply the other. And Agata, she's fluent in all their nicknames. She warns you not to sweep at night, it stirs up shadows. Not to whistle in the cellar, it calls things that weren't invited. And most of all, not to let your thoughts get too loud after sunset. They hear ideas as well as words, she mutters. Best to think about nothing. Be empty. Be boring. It sounds ridiculous. Until you learn that Agata's been here for 83 years, outlived her siblings, her children, even her priest. And she's still muttering, still watching, still never quite alone. There's a fringe belief, whispered only among the eldest, that some women can see death long before it arrives. Not as a skeleton, not as a ghost, but as a thinning in the world, as if the air's gone brittle in one spot. Agata once pointed at a man and said, "He's leaking." He died a week later. No wounds, no illness. Historians still argue whether these village seers were shamans, survivors, or simply the product of years of observation and isolation. But you start listening closer to Agata. Everyone does. Even the priest pauses when she speaks. One day she presses a small charm into your hand, a bit of bone, a strip of cloth, a pebble the size of a lentil. For forgetting, she says. You'll need it soon. You ask her what she means. But she's already turned away, mumbling a name that sounds like dust. The friar arrives in spring wearing boots caked in dried mud and a robe that smells like smoke and parchment. He's not from here, his accent's too round, his smile too polished. But he carries a notebook, and that makes the villagers uneasy. He says he's collecting local color, tales, customs, curious traditions, but you know better. He's hunting ghosts, the written kind. You see him at the market scribbling furiously as someone recounts the story of the well. You spot him near the chapel, jotting down the tale of the bride at the crossroads. He always smiles, Always thinks the speaker always adds just a little something more than they said. And soon the stories start changing. The bride now floats. The ghost in the barn moans names backward. The cobbler's ghost has a silver tongue and hooves. You pull the friar aside one morning, ask him why he's changing things. He chuckles. Stories evolve, he says. They have to, otherwise they die. He means no harm. That much is clear. But his notebook buzzes with unspoken power. He's not just recording stories. He's rewriting them. Adding Latin. Tucking in phrases from other villages. Even inventing a few ghosts outright. And here's the problem: once written, people believe. A week after he writes about the spirit who walks backwards through the rye field, someone sees it. 2 days after he jots down the tale of the dog with human eyes, a child runs home screaming from the woods, swearing it looked right at her. The friar isn't summoning ghosts. He's concretizing them. In Polish peasant tradition, most ghost stories stayed oral, passed from lip to lip, changing with every telling. That fluidity protected the village. It allowed stories to fade, evolve, soften. But the moment a tale is written down, it gains gravity, and that weight can anchor something in place. There's a fringe belief among some old storytellers writing down a lie about the dead is like carving their name on the wrong gravestone. It draws the wrong soul. Historians still debate whether these kinds of distortions influenced local hauntings or just reflected what people were already too eager to believe. But the friar's presence creates tension. Agatha, the old woman, spits at his feet. The beekeeper stops offering him honey. Even the priest grows cold, refusing to bless the friar's notebook. One evening, you see the friar alone on the chapel steps. He looks tired, pale. He says he had a dream about someone knocking on the walls of his inn room from inside. He leaves the next day, forgets his notebook. No one touches it. It sits on the altar for weeks, wrapped in linen tied with red thread. You walk past it every Sunday and pretend not to hear the pages rustling when there's no wind. Thursday comes with a stillness you don't trust. The sky is gray, but not the stormy kind, just heavy. The chickens are quiet. The bell at the chapel goes unrung. Even the dogs, those anxious sentinels, lie flat on their bellies, watching nothing. You ask around, why is everyone acting like there's a funeral? They answer with one word: Thursday. You wait for elaboration, but none comes. Just that word passed like a charm from mouth to mouth. Thursday. Eventually, the beekeeper breaks the silence, cracking his knuckles and muttering. It's when the veil thins. No one dies on Thursday. And if they do, they don't stay dead. You want to laugh, but you've learned better. In this village, Thursday isn't a weekday. It's an event. It's the day the dead walk. There's no written record for this. No saint or feast to explain it. But the locals swear that strange things always happen on Thursdays, especially in spring and autumn. A barn door opens itself. A loom works with no one seated. Bread spoils mid-rise. Or worse, rises too much. You ask Agatha about it. She's knitting with twine that looks suspiciously like dried hair. They come on Thursdays because it's the day no one expects, she says. Not holy, not cursed, just available. Some say it started with a man named Conrad who died on a Thursday and returned on the next, walked straight into his own funeral feast and sat down at the table. Didn't speak, didn't eat, just looked at everyone until they fled. He vanished by dusk. Since then, Thursdays have become strange. Some shops don't open. Children aren't allowed to play near the well. People turn mirrors to the wall and sprinkle poppy seeds across their doorsteps. Why poppy seeds? A fringe belief ghosts are compelled to count them. Every single one. If you scatter enough, it'll keep them busy until dawn. Historians still argue whether this is an imported Slavic belief or a hyper-local quirk born from coincidence and repetition. But you see the patterns. You feel them. You stay indoors that Thursday. You don't look out the window even when you hear footsteps. Even when you hear your name. Even when something taps the glass twice, then waits. You wait too. And when morning finally breaks and the air releases its breath, you untie the red thread around your window latch and say, just loud enough, not today. No one else speaks of it. No one has to. Next Thursday they'll do it all again. The graveyard is quiet but not restful. You're helping dig a plot for old Piotr, who died in his sleep with one hand over his heart and the other still clutching a lump of bread. A good death, they say. Peaceful. Natural. Still you notice the hesitation, the gravedigger mutters under his breath. Measures the plot twice, then again, and when the shovel hits stone, he stops dead. You peer into the hole. Beneath the churned soil is a layer of tightly packed rock, not boulders, not gravel. Just a smooth, solid plain, as though the earth is saying no more room. The gravedigger wipes his brow. It's been happening more, he says. Every week, we find another spot like this. It's like the land won't take them. And that's when the stories begin to swirl again. They say the cemetery is full, not just in space, but in spirit. That too many souls are stuck, not resting, not moving on. That the dead are building upward layer by invisible layer, and the ground is pushing back. In Polish folk tradition, burial is a sacred dialogue. You give the body back, the land accepts it, and the soul passes. But if the exchange is incomplete, wrong rituals, wrong day, wrong words, something gets lodged in between. There's a local belief mostly whispered by undertakers, and those who dig that if the cemetery refuses a body, it means the soul has unfinished work. Or worse, it means another spirit is already there, guarding the space. One woman claims her husband's grave sank overnight, not eroded, pulled down. Another says her child's plot grows weeds no matter how often she clears them. Not ordinary weeds, ones with thorns and little white flowers shaped like teeth. Fringe practice. Some villagers leave a coin beneath the body during burial, secretly even from the priest. It's not for Karen, it's for the earth itself. A bribe, a thank you, a way of saying, take him, please. Historians still debate whether this tradition reflects older pagan customs, rites of appeasement to forest or soil spirits, or just an evolved fear of spiritual rejection. But the gravedigger's face says enough. He leaves the hole half dug and lights a candle on the edge. Try again tomorrow, he says. Maybe the ground will be kinder. You visit the graveyard later that night. No wind, no owls, just the hum of something buried too close to the surface. You see a small patch of dirt rising as if breath were pushing from below. You don't stay long. As you leave, you glance back and count the candles. There's one more than before. The smokehouse has always had a strange hum to it. A warm, fatty scent of preserved meat and smoldered alderwood, the kind that sticks in your coat for days. But tonight it smells wrong. Too sweet, too sharp, like singed wool and hot metal. You round the corner just in time to see young Merrick run out, pale as flower, mouth open, not screaming, just gasping like he forgot how. Eyes he chokes. In the rafters. You grab a lantern and enter, half out of habit, half out of dread. It's empty. Nothing but meat hooks, a half-burned log in the pit, and old salt crusted on the floorboards. You shine the light upward. Nothing. But then, just for a breath, you see them. 2 red dots. Motionless. Unblinking. Watching. You leave. Fast. Word spreads before the sun rises. They say the smokehouse is cursed now. That someone brought meat there without blessing it first. That something was fed by mistake. And just like that, the story grows. Some say it's the ghost of a butcher's apprentice who fell into the pit. Others claim it's a spirit from the old woods drawn to the warmth. A few whisper that the red eyes belong to a creature that only comes when someone lies during a funeral. You don't ask what lie was told. Polish folklore warns about places of fire, ovens, kilns, smokehouses becoming homes for spirits. Fire purifies, yes, but it also attracts, like a beacon. And if the fire's left unchecked, it opens the door to things with no mouths and too many teeth. There's a fringe belief that smoke can carry souls. That if someone dies angry and their body is burned improperly, or not at all, their spirit latches onto the smoke and settles wherever it lands. Historians still debate whether this explains ghost sightings near forges and bakeries, or if it's just another way to make heat feel haunted. But you notice something even the bravest villagers now avoid: smoked meats. People start boiling everything. 3 nights later, someone burns the smokehouse to the ground. No ceremony, no warning, just flames and silence. No one speaks during the fire. No one cheers when it's gone. But the next morning, where the building once stood, you find a neat circle of ash with a single set of barefoot footprints leading out. Not out, and they don't match Merrick's size. You don't notice the mushrooms at first. It's Agnieszka, the baker's daughter, who points them out. She's 7, and she walks the fields like they belong to her. You follow her one morning as she skips toward the woods, humming a song with no words. Then she stops. There in the clearing, a perfect circle of mushrooms, pale gray caps, each one tilted slightly inward like they're whispering to each other. You count them. 13. It wasn't here yesterday, Agnieszka says. I come this way every morning. You look around. The grass inside the circle is flattened, pressed as if by feet or something heavier. And then you hear it, a faint, tuneless melody. No instruments. Just a voice somewhere between humming and sighing, drifting through the air like fog on strings. You step back. She steps forward. You grab her hand. Mushroom rings, or fairy rings, have long been feared and respected across Europe, but in Polish folklore they're rarely linked to fairies. Here they mark places where something crossed over, or tried to. Local belief says these rings appear after midnight dances, spectral gatherings of the dead who come to remember, to mourn, to summon. No one knows what they summon. No one wants to find out. Some say if you step into a ring, you vanish for a night and return changed. Taller, quieter, more forgetful. One man came back with white hair and no memory of his wife. Another returned speaking a dialect no one had heard in decades. There's a fringe practice known only to the village's older women, placing a shard of mirror at the center of the circle to confuse the spirits. Or maybe reflect them back. No one's sure which. Historians still argue whether these rings are fungal phenomena with uncanny timing or human attempts to explain sleepwalking, missing time, or trauma-induced fugue states. But science feels thin out here. Later that night, you pass the clearing again. The ring is still there, and someone has placed a doll in the middle, a simple thing made of straw wrapped in red ribbon. Its arms are stretched outward. Its head is tilted just a little too far to one side. You turn to leave and hear the song again, closer now. You hurry home. But when you pass your window just before bed, there's a ribbon tied to your fence post. Red, familiar, and it's fluttering in a breeze that doesn't move the trees. You sit in the tavern, and for once no one is talking about ghosts. They talk about weather, about fences, about butter. The silence about the other things is loud. Too loud. That's how you know something new is coming. It always starts like this. The tavern is the village's throat, its voice box. And when it goes quiet, something is building in the lungs beneath. You sip your drink and listen. Not to words, but to absences. And then between refills and glances, you hear it. A man leans close to his companion and whispers, "The same story. 3 villages over. Same ghost. Same words. Same night." He doesn't notice you listening. But the barkeep does. He nods barely and tops off your cup. "Stories are moving now," he says. "Faster than they should. The ghost tales aren't staying local anymore. That shouldn't happen. Each ghost is supposed to be born of a place, a name, a shame. But now people are telling the same story in towns that have never met. A barefoot woman humming lullabies. A child with no face peeking through windows. A man who leaves water in your boots. You've heard all these before, but now so has everyone else. Here's the thing, in Polish folklore, stories are usually tied to soil. Ghosts don't travel. They anchor. But now it feels like they're walking. Hitching rides in whispers and wine. And the tavern is the perfect breeding ground. It's a fringe belief among some old storytellers that if a ghost story is told too many times by too many tongues, in too short a span, it stops being a tale and becomes a summons. The story gathers mass, like snow in your boot, like rumor in a crowd. Historians still debate whether this phenomenon is memory coincidence or mass hysteria. But in this village, they know once a story spreads fast enough, wide enough, it starts breathing. You ask the beekeeper about it. He sets down his cup and says, "Sometimes a ghost doesn't haunt a place. Sometimes it haunts a story." Then he leans in and his voice drops. And sometimes the story starts haunting back. That night, your dreams are not your own. You hear tavern voices, clinking cups, fire crackling, and a whisper right next to your ear. "I heard this from someone like you. You wake with the taste of beer in your mouth, but you didn't drink, and your tongue has a cut on it. Small, shallow, like someone else had been talking." The children are singing again. You hear them before you see them, high, sweet voices weaving through the fog, repeating the same lines over and over like the lullaby of a broken music box. 3 steps back, don't look down. Close your eyes or you might drown. They chanted in perfect unison, circling a knot of mushrooms near the well. Their faces are blank, dreamy, caught in that eerie twilight between play and trance. You call to them, but none respond. Not until Agnieszka blinks and whispers, "We didn't make the song up. It came to us." You ask where they heard it. She shrugs. "We just knew it." You watch them play again the next day. Different tune, different steps, same pattern. It's a game now. One they all know. Even the younger ones, too small to tie their shoes, can hum the melody. You ask Tomasz the butcher, and he says he remembers playing it as a boy too. But back then it was a game for keeping spirits away. You stomped the ground to confuse the dead. You clapped to scare them. You held hands so no one was taken. Now the game has no instructions, just rhythm and rhyme. In Polish folk culture, children's games often carried double meanings. On the surface, they were innocent, but many were rooted in rituals older than memory chants to bind, to protect, to hide. Games disguised as magic, magic disguised as fun. One fringe belief claims that ghosts can't hurt a child actively playing. Something about motion, joy, circles. It confuses them, makes them forget what they were angry about. That's why children dance in rings, why they sing in patterns, why they sometimes smile at empty corners. Historians still argue whether these ritual games were protective spells or inherited echoes of pagan rites. But in this village, the line between nursery rhyme and incantation is a thin one. You notice that some children start carving odd shapes into the dirt with sticks, spirals, loops, and one symbol that looks like a pair of crossed keys. We just draw what we see, they say. You ask where? In dreams. You start to notice other things. A doll left in the woods facing east. A rock tied with string on every doorstep. A girl who only speaks backwards for 3 days, then suddenly stops. Each action looks random, but together. They feel like choreography, like something old using the children to remember itself. And that night you dream of a circle you can't escape, of small hands pulling you gently inward, of a voice childlike and ancient saying, "Play with us, just once." You wake up sitting, hands folded, rocking slightly, and outside in the yard you hear humming. It's your lullaby, but no one else knows it. The name arrives before the ghost does. It slips through the village like smoke under a door, whispered at the well, mumbled by the children, carved into a soft birch behind the chapel Jurek. No surname, no title, just that. You hear it 3 times in one day. Once from the priest almost by accident. Once from a drunk in the tavern who says it and immediately clutches his chest. And once most unsettlingly from your own mouth as you wake from a nap with the name on your tongue and no memory of why. You ask around. No one knows a Jurek. Or they say they don't. But every face stiffens just slightly when the name is said. Every back straightens. Later that evening you see something scratched into the dirt near your door. Jurek. Just that, and a small circle underneath it. In Polish ghost lore, naming something gives it shape. A soul without a name can't haunt you. It drifts, lost, unfinished. But once a name is spoken, believed, passed between mouths, it begins to cohere. Some say it gives the ghost a door, others say it gives them skin. One of the old women who you've never heard speak louder than a whisper pulls you aside. The name didn't come from us, she says. It came from itself. It wants to be known. Fringe belief. Some villagers thought ghosts that went too long without attention would invent their own legends, that if no one gossiped about them, they'd whisper into dreams until someone started the gossip, that they'd forge their own name like a coin, press it into your mind, and wait for you to spend it. Historians still argue whether this explains the way certain hauntings seem to appear suddenly in oral history fully formed, with names, habits, and backstories no one remembers creating. But here's what's happening now. People see Jurek, a tall man with a broken neck standing behind the bakery. A voice saying, "Don't forget me while the candles flicker." A reflection in the soup pot that isn't yours. They see him, they speak his name, and now he's part of the village. You try to ignore it. You try not to say it again. But then you stub your toe and mutter his name under your breath like it's yours to say. And you hear someone chuckle behind you. You don't turn around. You don't sleep well that night. And in the morning, someone scratched a message into your doorframe. You remember now. The wind carries your name again. Not from the forest, not from the well, this time from the mouths of the living. The village has gathered by the chapel. There's no funeral today, no wedding. But they're speaking in clusters low and urgent, and the air feels thick with purpose. You step closer. Someone glances at you, then away. Agnieszka, the baker's daughter, tugs her mother's sleeve and points at you. "He was in the dream," she says. The woman hushes her quickly. You ask what dream. They don't answer, but later you hear it. A shared dream. Different people, same night. All saw the same thing, you standing in the forest clearing, hands outstretched. Mouth moving but no words. Eyes blank, and something behind you too large to see, too quiet to hear. You laugh, but no one joins you, because the story's forming. You're part of it now. In Polish villages, the line between storyteller and subject is paper thin. Those who remember too much, ask too many questions, dig too deeply. They become part of the myth. Not punished, not vanished, just absorbed. It's starting. You see it in the glances. Hear it in the way people pause before saying your name as if testing its weight. You spot a doll on your doorstep, straw, black thread, little boots that look too much like yours. You ask the beekeeper what to do. He doesn't speak. He just offers you honey. That night the knocking starts. Not 3 times. 4, 5, 6. No pattern, no rhythm, just persistence. You try not to answer. You try to sleep. But something changes. The house feels unfamiliar. Your boots are damp by morning, though you never left. And then just before dawn you see yourself. or something shaped like you standing at the edge of the field. Still, watchful, waiting. You shut the door, bar it, whisper every prayer you half remember. It's too late. The story has taken root. You're the name now. You're the shape in someone else's dream. You're the warning whispered over bread and salt. And as the sun rises and the village begins to stir, you realize with bone-deep certainty, someone is telling your story. Right now. So you lie back, pulling the blanket to your chin, heart still fluttering with the last traces of the tale. Outside your window, the night air settles into a deep and watchful calm, and even the wind seems to exhale. The stories you've heard, the whispers, the dreams, the knocks fade like the smoke from a dying candle curling upward into silence. There's nothing to fear not anymore, because these ghosts, these tales, these village gossips with their eyes like needles and tongues like thread, they were never just stories. They were warnings, yes, but also lullabies, ways of stitching fear into something manageable. And now that you've walked among them, now that you've listened, they don't need to chase you. They simply settle, somewhere inside you, gentle, familiar. You're not the first to hear these things, and you won't be the last. The village always finds someone to listen, to carry the next name, to light the next candle. But for now, tonight you are warm, and the room is quiet, and the blanket is heavy in all the right ways. The world has gone soft around the edges. The night is full of stories, but none that want you right now. So breathe. Let the room be still. Let the whispers pass. Sleep, and if you dream, may it be of nothing at all.